My name is Catherine Sterling. I am 76 years old. My hands are not the soft, powdered hands of a storybook grandmother. They are the hands of a scientist. For 40 years, I was a food microbiologist and a public health inspector. My world was one of Petri dishes, of agar plates, of the cold, sterile beauty of a laboratory. I hunted invisible enemies: Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli. I understood the silent, secret, and often deadly world of decay. I knew the precise temperature at which bacteria multiply, the exact shelf life of a chicken breast, the subtle telltale signs of spoilage that most people overlook. My life's work was to protect the public from the very thing that is supposed to nourish them: their food. I was a guardian of the sacred trust between a person and their plate. My own home, the sturdy brick house my husband George and I bought and paid for over a lifetime of careful work, was always a sanctuary of safety. My kitchen was a fortress of cleanliness and order. Expiration dates were honored like religious holidays. Cross-contamination was a sin. George, a man with a simple, trusting soul, used to joke that our refrigerator was safer than a hospital operating room. He died 5 years ago, and with him went the warmth, the laughter, the shared meals that made this fortress a home. The silence he left behind was a vacuum, and like all vacuums, it was destined to be filled. My son, Liam, and his wife, Jessica, rushed in to fill it. Liam is a good man, I believe, but he is a weak one. He is a ship without a rudder, easily steered by the strongest current. And Jessica is a hurricane. She is ambitious, beautiful, and possesses a core of cold, hard pragmatism that I, in my professional life, could admire, but which, in my personal life, terrified me. They were struggling, they said. The city was too expensive. Their dreams were too big for their paychecks. They were drowning. And so, I, the guardian, the protector, made the most foolish and dangerous decision of my life. I lowered the drawbridge to my fortress. I invited them in. "Live with me," I'd said, the words feeling like a life raft I was extending. "Save your money, build your future. This house is too big for one old woman." They moved in, and my life of quiet, ordered retirement ended. I became their safety net, their cook, their cleaner, and their silent, ever-willing benefactor. My pension, my savings, the money George and I had so carefully accumulated, became their slush fund. It financed Jessica's failed online boutique. It paid for Liam's career change into a day trader, a venture that bled money with the slow, steady hemorrhage of a terminal wound. I did it, I told myself, to keep them safe. I did it because Liam was my only son. I was applying the principles of public health to my own family. I was containing a crisis. But I was not a guardian anymore. I was a host organism, and the parasites were growing stronger, more demanding, every day. The first sign that something was truly, fundamentally wrong was in the kitchen. My kitchen. My fortress. Jessica took over the grocery shopping, citing my age and the burden of the task. She was a hunter of bargains, a warrior of the discount aisle. The quality of the food in my home began to decline. Fresh, vibrant produce was replaced by wilted, sad-looking vegetables on the verge of turning. High-quality meat was replaced by cheap, factory-farmed cuts. And the expiration dates began to be treated not as laws, but as gentle suggestions. I would point it out, at first. "Jessica, dear," I'd say, holding a carton of milk. "This expired 3 days ago." She would wave a dismissive hand, her eyes not even leaving her phone. "Oh, those dates are just a scam by the big corporations to make you buy more." A day or two doesn't matter. "You're being fussy, Catherine." Fussy at me. A woman who had once shut down a 4-star restaurant for a temperature violation in their walk-in cooler. My expertise, my life's work, was dismissed as the fussy ramblings of a dotty old woman. Liam would just shrug, unwilling to contradict his wife. To keep the peace, to avoid a fight, I began to eat what I was given. I was a food safety expert, knowingly consuming questionable food in my own home. The irony was as bitter as soured milk. I was sacrificing my own principles, my own safety, for a fragile, illusory peace. I did not yet understand that they were not just careless. I did not yet understand that the decline in the quality of my food and the subsequent decline in my own health was not a bug in their system. It was the feature. The campaign was one of slow, insidious attrition. It began with a series of minor, but unsettling digestive upsets. A day of stomach cramps. A night of nausea. I was 76. It was easy to dismiss it all as the simple, unpleasant process of aging. When I would mention my discomfort, Jessica would look at me with a kind of clinical, detached concern that sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe you're developing a food sensitivity, Katherine," she'd say, her voice smooth. "It happens at your age. Your system gets weaker." My system was not weak. I had the constitution of a workhorse. But her words, repeated day after day, began to have an effect. She was creating a narrative, a story of my decline, and I, with my aches and pains, was becoming her unwilling star witness. Liam played his part, a role of the concerned, helpless son. "You should probably see a doctor, Mom," he'd say, his eyes full of a soft, worried look that I now see was pure performance. "We're worried about you." The humiliation was not in being sick. It was in their feigned concern. It was in the way they would exchange small, knowing glances over my head when I would push away a plate of food that just didn't taste right, that had a subtle, off flavor that only my trained palate could detect. They made me feel like I was losing my mind, that my own body and senses were betraying me. The moment of absolute, horrifying clarity, the moment the veil of their deception was ripped away and I saw the stark, monstrous truth beneath, came on a Thursday. It was a hot day in July. I had not been feeling well for a few days, a low-grade nausea clinging to me like the humid summer air. Jessica announced she was making a special light lunch for me to help me feel better. It was a chicken salad. She brought it to me on a tray as I sat in the garden. It looked beautiful. It was presented in one of my late husband's favorite porcelain bowls, garnished with a sprig of parsley from my own herb garden. It was a picture of loving care. "I made it just for you, Katherine," she'd said, her smile wide and bright. "Eat up. You need your strength." I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. The smell was slightly off, a little too tangy, a little too sweet. But I looked at her hopeful, expectant face. I saw my son Liam, watching from the kitchen window, a faint, encouraging smile on his lips. And I did what I had been doing for years. I suppressed my own expert judgment. I chose to believe in the son I had raised, not the evidence before me. I ate the chicken salad. It was a catastrophic mistake. The illness began 3 hours later. It was not a gentle upset. It was a violent, brutal, and unmistakable case of food poisoning. I was racked with cramps that felt like hot knives twisting in my gut. I was overcome with waves of nausea, with a fever that left me shaking and drenched in a cold sweat. I was an expert in the symptoms. I knew, with the absolute certainty of a scientist, that I had ingested a significant bacterial load. This was not a sensitivity. This was an assault. I managed to crawl to the bathroom, and as I was violently ill, I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. My face was pale and sheened with sweat, my eyes wide with a terror that was not just about the physical sickness. It was the terror of a dawning, monstrous realization. The chicken salad. The special, light lunch. The lunch made just for me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. They were not just neglecting me. They were not just trying to save money. They were actively, methodically, trying to make me sick, to weaken me, to accelerate my decline, to make the narrative they were spinning to their friends, the story of the frail, sickly old woman, a reality. They were poisoning me, in my own home, with my own food. The thought was so horrific, so fundamentally evil, that my mind reeled. But as I clung to the cool porcelain of the sink, another part of my mind, the cold, analytical, scientific part, took over. The part that did not deal in emotion, but in data. I stumbled out of the bathroom and into the kitchen. They were gone, out running errands, they had said. I went to the kitchen trash can. I dug through the coffee grounds and the vegetable peels. And I found it. The plastic container from the store-bought, pre-cooked chicken they had used for the salad. I pulled it out, and I looked at the expiration date on the bottom. It had expired 10 days ago. I stood there, in my silent, beautiful kitchen, holding the proof of their crime in my trembling hand. And the last, lingering shred of love I had for my son, the foolish, stubborn hope that he was just weak, not evil, withered and die. He was not just a bystander. He was a co-conspirator. He had watched her make that salad. He had smiled at me from the window as I ate it. In that moment, the victim died, and the public health inspector was reborn. The heartbroken mother was gone, and the forensic scientist took her place. I felt a clarity so cold, so pure, it burned away my tears. I was no longer a resident in a hostile home. I was an undercover investigator at a crime scene, and I was about to build a case so perfect, so detailed, and so utterly damning that they would never, ever see it coming. My kitchen was no longer a place of nourishment. It was a laboratory, and the experiment was about to begin. I rinsed the empty plastic chicken container under the tap, my movements slow and deliberate, like a surgeon scrubbing in. I placed it on a clean paper towel to dry. This was no longer just a piece of trash. This was Exhibit A, the foundational piece of evidence in the case I was now building in the cold, clear, and methodical laboratory of my mind. The physical illness raged for 2 days. I was weak, dehydrated, and miserable. But my mind was a fortress of cold, diamond-hard clarity. Liam and Jessica played their parts to perfection. They hovered with looks of deep, sorrowful concern. Jessica brought me weak tea and dry toast, her touch on my forehead a grotesque parody of loving care. Liam would sit by my bed, his face a mask of worried filial duty, and ask, "Are you sure you don't want me to call a doctor, Mom?" "No, dear," I would whisper, my voice a frail, reedy thing. "It's just a stomach bug. I'll be fine. I just need to rest." I could not go to a doctor. I could not go to a hospital. A doctor would ask for a stool sample. They would test it. They would find the specific pathogen, the salmonella, the campylobacter, whatever bacterial horror had been breeding in that 10-day-old chicken, and they would have to file a report. An investigation would begin. It would be too soon. My case was not yet strong enough. A single incident, they could argue, was an accident, a tragic oversight. An amateur, when faced with a crime, calls the police immediately. A professional builds an airtight, irrefutable case first. And then, only then, do they deliver the fatal blow. So, I played my part. I was the frail, sick, and slightly confused old woman they wanted me to be. My weakness was my camouflage. My supposed decline was my greatest strategic asset. They saw me getting weaker, more dependent, and their guard went down. They became careless. Their cruelty, once cloaked in a thin veil of plausible deniability, became more brazen. As I recovered, I began my work. My home was now a crime scene, and I was its sole undercover forensic investigator. My first step was to secure my laboratory and my evidence locker. In the back of the deep walk-in closet in my bedroom, behind my winter coats and a row of my late husband's suits, was a small, unused mini-fridge we had once used for a wet bar. It was the perfect, secret, climate-controlled evidence locker. My second step was to acquire my tools. I went online and, using my private credit card, I ordered what I needed. They were not weapons. They were scientific instruments. A box of sterile, individually wrapped specimen bags with secure Ziploc seals. A roll of professional-grade laboratory labels. A set of fine-tipped, permanent ink marking pens. A high-quality digital pocket scale, accurate to 1/100th of a gram. A new, dedicated legal journal, identical to the ones I had used in my professional life. The package arrived 2 days later, and I smuggled it into my room, like a spy receiving a dead drop. The game had begun. I became a master of deception. At mealtimes, I would take the plate of food Jessica served me with a weak, grateful smile. I would make a show of eating, pushing the food around my plate, taking a few small, hesitant bites. But my real work happened when she wasn't looking. With a swift, practiced movement, a sleight of hand I developed over a few days, I would scrape a small representative sample of each food item, a spoonful of the grayish-looking stew, a piece of the strangely slimy fish, a dollop of the yogurt that was suspiciously warm, into one of my sterile specimen bags, which I kept hidden in my apron pocket. After each meal, I would retreat to my room to rest. There, the real work would begin. My bedroom became my laboratory. I would lock the door. I would take out the specimen bag. On a clean label, I would meticulously record the details in my clear, precise, scientific script. Sample ID 1 to 1. Date July 28. Time 1835. Meal dinner. Description: beef stew, derava. Notes: meat has a faint iridescent sheen. Carrots are unusually soft, almost mushy. A sour, off odor is present. I would then weigh the sample, record its weight in my journal, seal the bag, and place it in the back of my secret mini-fridge. Day after day, meal after meal, the evidence accumulated. The back of my mini-fridge began to fill with a library of their crimes. Sample 4. Tuna salad with a sell-by date that was 6 days past. Sample 12. Milk, cloudy, and starting to separate. Sample 19. Leftover chicken casserole, left on the counter for over 4 hours before being re-refrigerated. A textbook violation of every food safety protocol in existence. Alongside the physical samples, I kept my journal. It was my second, and most powerful, weapon. It was a masterpiece of forensic documentation. I recorded everything. Every meal. Every symptom I feigned, and every symptom that was real. Every snide comment from Jessica. Every act of willful blindness from my son. I used my cell phone to take pictures of the expiration dates on the packages they would hastily try to bury in the bottom of the kitchen trash. I became the silent, meticulous archivist of my own attempted murder. I was playing a long, patient, and very dangerous game. I had to consume just enough of the tainted food to make my performance of declining health believable, but not enough to make myself truly, seriously ill again. It was a delicate, terrifying, balancing act. I lost weight. My skin grew pale. The circles under my eyes darkened. The weaker I appeared, the more confident, the more arrogant they became. They began to talk more openly in front of me, assuming I was too frail, too out of it, to understand. I would sit in my armchair, my eyes closed, pretending to doze, and I would listen. Her life insurance policy is up to date, right? I heard Jessica ask Liam one evening. You checked the beneficiary? Of course, Liam had replied, his voice a low murmur. It's me, sole beneficiary. And the house. The house is in her name alone, no mortgage. It all comes to me. It's just a matter of time. Jessica had sighed, a sound of pure reptilian avarice. Dr. Adams said with her declining constitution, another bad bout of the flu could easily. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. I sat in my chair, my eyes still closed, my breathing slow and even. But my heart was a block of ice, and my mind was a whirring, cold, and beautiful machine. The evidence was collected. The motive was established. The case was almost complete. All I needed now was the final, definitive, and legally unimpeachable proof. I needed to connect their actions to my illness in a way that no lawyer, no matter how clever, could ever dismiss as coincidence. It was time to go to the doctor, but I would do it on my own terms. I waited for the perfect opportunity, a moment when their arrogance and my feigned weakness would align to create the perfect conditions for the final phase of my investigation. It came 2 months after the chicken salad incident. Jessica, emboldened by my apparent decline, served me a piece of shepherd's pie for dinner. The smell alone was a 5-alarm fire to my trained senses. The ground meat had a sickly sweet, cloying odor, the telltale sign of advanced bacterial decay. This was not just spoiled. This was a biological weapon on a plate. This was the one. I made a show of eating a few bites, my performance of a weak, dutiful old woman now perfected. "It's delicious, dear," I'd murmured, pushing the potatoes around my plate. As always, I secured my sample. The label on this one was stark. A sample ID 47. Date Sep 22. Time 19:10. Meal dinner. Description: shepherd's pie. Notes: strong, putrefactive odor. Ground meat is grayish-brown. Likely high bacterial load. Potential danger: severe. That night, I did not have to feign my illness. The few small bites I had forced down were enough to make me genuinely, violently ill. The cramps, the nausea, the fever. It was the chicken salad all over again, but worse. This time, however, the sickness was not a source of terror, but a tool. A strategic asset. In the middle of the night, at the peak of my very real, very demonstrable illness, I began to cry out. I feigned confusion, delirium. "George?" I called out, my voice weak and trembling. "George, is that you? I'm so cold." My performance brought them running. They found me on the floor of my bedroom, shaking, my skin clammy. I saw the look that passed between them. It was not concern. It was a cold, reptilian excitement. This was it. This was the bad bout of the flu they had been waiting for. "We have to call an ambulance," Liam said, his voice a perfect imitation of a panicked son. "Yes," I whispered, my eyes fluttering shut. "Please, help me." The paramedics arrived. I was bundled onto a stretcher, my body still trembling. As they were carrying me out, I saw Jessica in the kitchen, hastily, but not hastily enough, scraping the rest of the shepherd's pie into the garbage disposal. She was destroying the evidence, but she was too late. The most important evidence, sample 47, was safely tucked away in the secret mini-fridge in my closet. At the hospital, I played my part. I was the confused, sick old woman. The doctors ran their tests. They drew blood. And, most importantly, they took the one sample I had been waiting for them to take. A stool sample. The results came back the next morning. A young, kind-faced doctor came into my room, his expression grave. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "I'm afraid it's not good news. Your tests came back positive for a very severe and very specific strain of E. coli poisoning." My heart gave a cold, triumphant leap. It was the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. "E. coli," I whispered, my voice full of a perfect, quavering innocence. "But how? I'm so careful with my food. We'll have to notify the public health department," the doctor continued. "They'll need to investigate the source of the contamination. They'll probably want to test the food at your home." It was at that moment that I made my move. I confided in the doctor. I told him a story. A story of a worried, forgetful old woman and a well-meaning but perhaps careless daughter-in-law who did all the cooking. "I'm probably just being silly," I said, a tear rolling down my cheek. "But sometimes the food just doesn't taste right. But my son says I'm just being fussy." The doctor, a man trained to spot the signs of elder abuse, looked at me and his kind face hardened. He had heard stories like this before. My plan was working perfectly. The public health department, a world I knew intimately, was now involved. But I could not leave the final critical step to chance. I needed to make sure they tested the right samples. That afternoon, when the nurse came in, I made a request. "I'm feeling a little better," I said. "I'd like to call an old friend to come and visit me, a colleague from my old job." The colleague I called was Detective Miller, a man I had worked with for 20 years, a man I had trained in the fine art of foodborne illness investigation, a man who now headed the elder abuse unit of the city police department. He arrived at my hospital room an hour later. He was no longer a young public health inspector. He was a grizzled, weary-looking detective, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low, concerned rumble as he saw me in the hospital bed. "What in God's name happened to you?" I did not cry. I did not tell him a story of a heartbroken mother. I was a scientist, presenting my findings to a respected peer. "Miller," I said, my voice low and clear, "I have a case for you. A long-term, systematic poisoning for profit. The victims are myself, and by extension, the public trust. The perpetrators are my son and his wife." For the next hour, I laid it all out. I told him about the spoiled food, the feigned concern, the life insurance policy. And I told him about the evidence. "There is a mini fridge in the back of my bedroom closet," I said. "In that fridge are 47 individually bagged, labeled, and dated samples of every tainted meal they have served me for the past 2 months. And in your own hospital lab, you have a sample from my body that has tested positive for E. coli." I saw the look on his face. The look of a detective who has just been handed a case that is not just a slam dunk, but a work of art. "And I can tell you with scientific certainty, Miller," I concluded, "that if you test sample 47 from my freezer, the shepherd's pie, you will find it contains the exact same, specific, and relatively rare strain of E. coli that is currently in my bloodstream." I had not just given him a crime. I had given him the motive, the method, the timeline, and the smoking, bacteria-ridden gun. He stood up. "Stay here, Catherine," he said, his voice a low growl of pure, cold rage on my behalf. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't let your son take you home. I'm going to get a warrant, and then I'm going to pay a visit to your kitchen." I lay back against the pillows. The trap, so carefully, so scientifically, so patiently set, was about to be sprung. The hunt for my invisible enemies was over, and they were about to be brought, kicking and screaming, into the harsh, unforgiving light. I remained in the hospital for 2 more days, a quiet, strategic retreat. I was, in effect, a protected witness in the case against my own family. I refused to take calls from Liam, telling the nurses to inform him that I was resting and not accepting visitors. I knew this would fuel his and Jessica's panic, letting them stew in the acidic juices of their own anxiety. They had no idea what was coming, but they knew they had lost control of the narrative, and for people like them, that was a fate worse than death. The raid, and I can think of no better word for it, took place on a Saturday morning. Detective Miller, a man who clearly believed in a certain theatrical justice, chose a time when he knew they would both be home. He didn't go alone. He arrived with 2 uniformed officers, a forensic technician from the Public Health Department, and a search warrant that was as broad and as beautiful as a Declaration of Independence. I was not there to witness it, of course, but Miller, in a later debriefing that was as professional as any we had conducted in our old careers, described the scene to me with a grim, satisfying detail. They were in the kitchen, drinking coffee, when the doorbell rang. Liam answered it. The sight of a detective and 2 uniformed officers on his mother's doorstep made the color drain from his face. Jessica came up behind him, her face a mask of belligerent confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, before Miller had a chance to speak. Miller, a man who had no patience for the entitled, simply held up the warrant. "This," he said, his voice a low rumble, "is a court order. We have a warrant to search these premises, specifically the kitchen, pantry, and trash receptacles, in connection with an ongoing investigation into a case of severe foodborne illness." The word investigation hung in the air, a cold, hard thing. I can picture their faces, the frantic, panicked calculations whirring behind their eyes. They still thought it was about a mistake, an accident. They still thought they could lie their way out of it. "This is ridiculous," Jessica had sneered, trying to regain control. "My mother-in-law had a little stomach bug. She's a fussy old woman." "Minun. Ear." "Your mother-in-law," Miller had replied, his eyes like chips of granite, "is currently recovering from a severe E. coli infection that nearly killed her. And we have reason to believe the source of that infection is in this house. Now, are you going to step aside? Or are we going to have to add obstruction of justice to the list of potential charges?" They stepped aside. The collapse was a quiet, methodical, and deeply scientific affair. While the uniformed officers kept a shell-shocked Liam and Jessica confined to the living room, Miller and the forensic technician went to work. They were not just searching. They were collecting evidence. They knew what they were looking for. From the kitchen trash, they retrieved the remains of the shepherd's pie, still in its foil container, exactly as Jessica had tried to dispose of it. In the back of the refrigerator, behind a newer, fresher carton of milk, they found the one that was 10 days past its expiration date. In the pantry, they found the moldy bread, the soft sprouting potatoes, the cans of food with telltale bulges that signaled the presence of botulism. It was a treasure trove of bacterial malfeasance. The forensic technician, a young, sharp-eyed woman who had trained under me a decade ago, worked with sterile gloves and sample bags, just as I had. Each piece of spoiled food was bagged, tagged, and sealed as evidence. But the final, devastating blow came from a place they had never even considered. Detective Miller, acting on the information I had given him, walked upstairs and directly to the closet in my bedroom. He pushed aside my winter coats, and there it was, the small, secret mini-fridge. He opened it. Inside, lined up in neat chronological rows, was my library of their crimes. 47 sealed, meticulously labeled samples of every spoiled, tainted, and dangerous meal they had served me over the past 2 months. It was a prosecutor's dream. It was an alibi-proof, scientifically unimpeachable record of their long, systematic campaign of poison. Miller took one of the samples, sample 47, the shepherd's pie, and walked back downstairs. He held the small, sealed bag up for Liam and Jessica to see. "This," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "was recovered from a private refrigerator in your mother's bedroom. It is a sample of the shepherd's pie she was served on the night she became so violently ill. It is dated, timed, and labeled in her own hand. And I am willing to bet my entire pension that when our lab tests this sample, it will be a perfect 100% DNA match to the specific strain of E. coli that is currently in your mother's system." He let the implications of that statement settle into the silent room. This was not about carelessness anymore. This was not about serving expired milk by mistake. This was about a pattern. This was about intent. This was about a secret collection of evidence that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that they knew exactly what they were doing. Liam, my son, the weak, rudderless ship, finally, completely broke. He let out a strangled sob and buried his face in his hands. Jessica just stared at the small plastic bag as if it were a bomb. Her face was no longer angry, no longer arrogant. It was the blank, white, empty face of a person who has been utterly and completely checkmated. The game was over. The science had won. I did not press for criminal charges of attempted murder. That would have been a long, messy, and public trial, and my primary objective, to protect myself and remove them from my life, had already been achieved. Instead, I let Detective Miller and the district attorney's office offer them a deal. Faced with a mountain of evidence that would have sent them both to prison for a very long time, they accepted. They pled guilty to a lesser charge of felony elder abuse and criminal negligence. Jessica, as the primary architect of the scheme, received a 2-year prison sentence. Liam, in exchange for his full tearful confession and testimony against his wife, received 5 years of probation and mandatory counseling. The house, my house, was returned to me, its sole rightful occupant. My old life ended the day I watched them being led away in handcuffs on the local news. My new life began the next morning with the most thorough and satisfying cleaning my kitchen has ever seen. I threw everything out. Every can, every box, every container. I scrubbed every surface with bleach until my hands were raw. I was not just cleaning a room. I was performing an exorcism. I was purging my fortress of the enemy that had breached its walls. When I was done, the room was gleaming, sterile, and beautifully, blessedly empty. And then, I began to restock. I went to the farmer's market. I bought fresh, vibrant, life-affirming food. I filled my pantry with high-quality ingredients, with the smells of spices and good coffee. I filled my refrigerator with fresh milk, with organic vegetables, with the simple, beautiful building blocks of a life well lived. My life now is quiet, but it is not lonely. It is a life of my own choosing, governed by my own rules. The most important rule is this: I will never again eat a meal I have not prepared myself, or that has not been prepared by someone I trust implicitly. But the scientist in me, the public health inspector, could not simply retire. My experience, as horrific as it was, had given me a new, urgent sense of purpose. I had the knowledge, the experience, and now the personal testimony to help others. I started a foundation. It's called the Sterling Shield Project. We work with senior centers and elder care agencies to provide free, confidential resources for seniors who suspect they are victims of domestic abuse. But we do more than that. We teach them. We empower them. I run seminars, not on microbiology, but on the science of self-preservation. I teach them how to document, how to save evidence, how to build a case. I give them small, discreet safety kits, just a few sterile sample bags, a small notebook, and a card with the direct private number to Detective Miller's unit. I am teaching them to be the forensic scientists of their own lives. I am giving them the tools to fight back, not with anger, but with data. With the cold, hard, and undeniable power of the truth. This evening I am in my kitchen. The room is filled with the warm, comforting scent of chicken soup, made from scratch. A large pot of it is simmering on the stove. In an hour, I will be taking it to a local women's shelter. It is a simple meal, made with the best ingredients, prepared in a kitchen that is, once again, a place of safety, of nourishment, of love. I learned a terrible and powerful lesson. The most dangerous poisons are not always the ones you can see. They are the ones that are disguised as love, as care, as family. They are the slow, creeping toxins of abuse and neglect. But I also learned that the most powerful antidote is the truth. You must be the scientist of your own life. You must be willing to collect the samples, to document the data, to build the case. You must be willing to take your evidence, your truth, and feed it to the world, no matter how much it might hurt. Because in the end, the truth is the only thing that can truly set you free. And it is the only thing that will ever truly keep you safe.